Hey, it's Brian Buntz, Pharma Editor at Drug Discovery and Development and Pharmaceutical Processing World, and I'd like to welcome you to our next episode of Pharma50Talks for this year's Pharma50. I recently got a chance to sit down with Dr. Brad Perkins, Chief Medical Officer at Karius, who details how the company aims to transform the diagnosis of infections with a non-invasive liquid biopsy. Dr. Perkins also talks about how the California startup aims to help establish a world where infectious disease is no longer a major human health threat. Brad walks us through how Karius uses genomics and AI to enable rapid, accurate diagnosis of more than 1,000 infectious pathogens from one test. He also talks about how he has seen the demand for infectious disease diagnostics evolve, how AI-based diagnostics can have a broader impact on our fight against antimicrobial resistance, and much more. I hope you enjoy our discussion.
I'm Brad Perkins. I'm a physician and a scientist, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Karius.
Wondering if you could give me a brief overview of Karius and the Karius test and explain how the company uses genomics and AI to enable rapid, accurate diagnosis of more than 1,000 infectious pathogens from one test.
It's really exciting. I've been part of this journey going back about 3 decades. I think we are ready to see revolutionary change in the diagnosis and management of infectious diseases with this platform, both the science aspects and the technology aspects. Cell-free DNA as an analyte has been around been recognized since the 40s, was first recognized in the context of cancer, but really it wasn't until we had sequencing tools and computational power that it came into its own as a clinical tool with multiple uses. So the first area of real traction was in non-invasive pregnancy testing, where just amazing that instead of having to do amniocentesis and other invasive tests that had great risk associated with them, you could just check a routine blood sample and examine the child's DNA in that blood sample. The technology has since then been applied to graft rejection. So basically monitoring the health of a graft, whether it's a cellular graft or an organ graft in patients. And also, broadly and maybe most vividly in the context of liquid biopsy for cancer. What you used to have to do with a paraffin block embedded tissue sample, you can now do testing a peripheral blood sample in terms of identifying mutations associated with cancer. We were founded out of Stanford in 2014, out of Stephen Quake's laboratory. Our 2 founders were there working on graft rejection use for cell-free DNA when they realized that there was also a microbial signature in these patients. The challenge was that there is a range of concentration of cell-free DNA, and the fetal DNA in mom's blood is really the highest concentration of cell-free DNA that we're aware of. Almost 10% of cell-free DNA that's circulating in mom's blood is fetal in origin. Intermediate to that are graft rejection cell-free DNA and cancer cell-free DNA. It turns out that microbial cell-free DNA is at the bottom of the stack, and the signal with microbial cell-free DNA is about 5 orders of magnitude less than fetal cell-free DNA. So the first challenge that had to overcome to commercialize this test in 2016 was to find ways to enhance that signal, that microbial signal, and suppress the background human DNA. The other major challenge was removing contaminants, microbial contaminants from the process, both microbial contaminants that were in all the reagents that we use to do molecular biology, but also contaminants that get introduced in the process of obtaining the specimens and sending the specimens to our laboratory. The other principal challenge that we've used, AI to address is that, there are, over 1 million whole genome sequences of various microbial agents out in the world in publicly available databases. Only a very small fraction of those are of suitable quality to use as references to align our microbial cell-free DNA. And really, one of the most interesting applications of artificial intelligence was the process we used to take that million plus, and reduce it down to about 20,000 reference genomes for, bacterial, viral, parasitic, and fungal pathogens, reduce it down to about 20,000, and then, use those 20,000 in a proprietary data set to align our microbial DNA to identify the pathogen and, of course, quantitate the amount of pathogen-specific microbial cell-free DNA that's in plasma.
Really interesting. Was wondering if you could also explain how you've seen demand for infectious disease diagnostics evolve so far this year and as well as last year.
Of course, it's been, the uncomfortable equilibrium that humans have with microbial pathogens has been apparent, during this catastrophic pandemic. I think it's raised the awareness of improving our ability to rapidly diagnose and manage infectious diseases more efficiently. And really in two domains. One is, we've got to develop technology and processes to recognize these pathogens earlier. Many of them obviously come from animals, so understanding that animal-human interface is important. But once an infection is established in humans, we also have to get much better at rapidly diagnosing those infections and doing that in a safe way that's least invasive. The current standard of care for infectious disease hasn't changed in 40 or 50 years, with a few minor exceptions of PCR. The adage with many infectious disease physicians is tissue is the issue. And by saying that, they mean you've got to go to the site of infection and get the involved tissue or fluid, and then culture that to find out what's causing the infection. And that results in lots of risky invasive procedures, whether it's putting a needle into the vertebral column to get cerebral spinal fluid, putting a scope down the lungs to get bronchial samples, or actually doing surgery to get material from abscesses such as those that are in the liver or even the brain. We offer, an incredible new platform that has the potential to detect all classes of DNA pathogens, do that quickly, and do that non-invasively. And that's quite a remarkable progress for diagnosis and management of infectious diseases.
Could you also explain briefly how AI-based diagnostics can have a broader impact on our fight against antimicrobial resistance?
Yeah, so, I mentioned this uncomfortable equilibrium that we have with these microbes. Humans evolved in a world that was already completely dominated by microbial organisms, and we live in a very fine balance with them. And as is frequently mentioned, there are more microbial agents in and on our body than have human cells, which is a pretty remarkable situation. Unfortunately, if you don't prevent infections, and we don't do a really good job at a high level preventing very many infections. So if you haven't prevented them, you're forced to diagnose and treat them. And so I talked about the problems with diagnosis, and I think we can offer a great deal of progress in that dimension. But the treatment part is really tough because these microbial pathogens are not genomically static. They very quickly acquire capabilities to resist our best efforts to treat them with various antimicrobial agents. And they can do so quite rapidly, particularly when these antimicrobial agents are misused or overused, both in human health or in agricultural applications. And we now have a global public health crisis because we don't do a good job diagnosing many infections, and we overuse and misuse many of our antimicrobial agents, and the pipeline for creating new antimicrobial agents is dwindling rapidly. And there's complex reasons for that, but clearly market forces are in play. And many life sciences companies believe that there's better ways to spin their invested capital than developing new antibiotics. As a result, or antimicrobial agents, we are in a crisis situation where WHO consistently lists antimicrobial resistance as one of the top 10 threats to human health at a global level.
That's pretty telling. On a broadly related point, could you speak to the company's vision of establishing a world in which infectious disease is no longer a major threat to human health?
Yeah, I mean, it's an audacious vision, but I think it's one that's commensurate with the platform we've developed and are developing. The notion is, if we can accelerate and improve diagnosis while making it safer, the notion is we will be better able to treat infectious diseases. And if we can do that, there will be less inappropriate antibiotic use, number one, because lots of the misuse of our current antibiotics are a result of not being able to diagnose the cause of infections. So doctors put people on what they call broad spectrum antibiotics in the hope that one of those, they don't know what's causing the infections, but the hope is that one of them will treat the infection. Well, there's a lot of collateral damage from doing that. So if we can diagnose infections quickly and safely and empower physicians to choose and use only the best suited antimicrobial agent, we will advance toward that world where infectious diseases are no longer a threat to humans. Extending out from that, there's lots of opportunities to look at public health applications in pandemic preparedness, and that's down the road for Karius. But we are committed to that vision, and we think this is a realistic technology to move us toward that world.
So last question. So I saw last year Karius installed the new chief financial officer and a chief legal officer as well. Was wondering how those appointments have affected the company's business and strategic vision.
Yeah, so Alec Ford came in as the new CEO of Karius more than 18 months ago or so, maybe 16 months, and has been committed to building a world-class leadership team at Karius. And Bill and Steve are great examples of that. So Bill, our new CFO, really has world-class experience in diagnostics and has been on Wall Street and around diagnostic tests for several decades. And, having that experience at Karius is company changing. And in a very short time, Bill has taken that position and helped to set us out on a track that I think is likely to put us in we have to be financially successful in order to scale and get this technology to more people in the US and globally. And I think Bill is putting us in a position to do that. I'm extraordinarily grateful for that. And Steve, our new chief legal officer, in the same way that Bill has deep expertise in financial markets around diagnostics, Steve has deep expertise in intellectual property. And, we have some very strong foundational intellectual property around microbial cell-free DNA at Karius. And Steve is going to be an outstanding steward of our existing intellectual property, and I believe keep us on track in developing new intellectual property as we add features and new products to Karius. So outstanding team members, very excited to have both of them at Karius.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have. I thought you have a very interesting background, physician, scientist, entrepreneur. I was looking at your LinkedIn bio. Seems like you've had some experience co-founding companies and now you're at Karius, but it seems like you have a lot of interesting kind of, experience in your various roles in the past?
Yeah, I think with a single underlying thread that Karius represents well, I get very excited about new science and technology that's ready to scale and have an outsized impact on human health. And, so I've been fortunate to be able to do that in vaccine work at CDC, in a couple of other areas at CDC around advanced molecular techniques. And then, similarly in a couple of health IT areas, I've been able to be involved with some new technologies that I think are very impactful in human health. And Karius is just an extension of that. So although my experiences may look varied, I've really been on this theme of excitement about new science and technology that has the potential to rapidly scale to improve human health.
It's exciting. Well, great. It's great meeting you today. And I appreciate your time, and thanks for chatting about the company and your role and kind of your vision for it and all that. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I'd like to thank Dr. Brad Perkins for the discussion. Check out our next episode as I get a chance to speak with Tom Cavanaugh, Janssen's company group chairman, global commercial strategy organization, to talk about the company's growth ambitions. Please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Drug Discovery and Development on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. We'll have more for you as soon as we continue with this year's Pharma 50. Until next time.